somebody like say from Shasta County or Butte County, whatever, came here and they were under a 2% at 55, they can transfer that 2 at 55?
Typically, they would go to 2% at 60, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah, 'cause
We
when
have
those-
3 tiers
have 3
for
tiers.
each category, miscellaneous and safety, so it's, there's no given of which category, or what formula a new hire will go to.
I thought, I mean, if you have somebody in-house that goes, laterally transfers, they're gonna be,
2% at 55.
yeah, they're gonna be grandfathered in, but if you bring somebody, even if it's a PERS member from another jurisdiction in, they're gonna be at the 2% at 60, they're not gonna be at 2% at
Right.
55.
And if they're not a PERS participant, they're 2 at 63.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that needs to be, you need to define that then.
We will. The other issue, and perhaps this is a good time to discuss it, is the issue of the county administrative officer is a bargaining unit of 1, and there's some debate over, PERS has a rule that with retirees, you have to offer retirees the same as you're offering the current active employees. And the board has in the past expressed interest in reducing the medical benefits to the CAO groups to the same level as the department heads.
So they're not a group of 1, they're a group of, with,
Well, I think they'd still be a group of 1, but they would be getting the benefits as the department head. It's a very complicated issue, but it's probably an opportune time to explore.
I thought we did that the last go around, but in terms of, that was the direction given, so whether it was implemented or not.
Yeah, there's the government code that basically says you have to offer the same to both groups, so, and I understand the county did go through a meet and confer process with the retirees and never completed the process, is my understanding. And so
Yeah,
perhaps,
Crabtree kind of gave up and didn't bring it back.
so perhaps we could reactivate that process during the next 60 days, get it resolved.
Well, I'm in favor of the CAO be part of the department head group and not be a standalone.
Okay.
Huh?
I think that's right.
You agree? Yeah.
So that'll come back on the 28th then, did you say? Yeah, perfect. Okay, there.
On this deal here, I mean, we said we talked about moving in a different direction. I mean, it seems to me there ought to be I don't know what the other direction is that was talked about, but we ought to be making some changes in here if that was what was based, in my opinion. It was change the vision or something.
Right. Yeah. I think we were gonna look at changing, we said a bit of the structure, maybe with adding some staff and a deputy CAO or slash personnel manager to make the department run. But I know it's not covered in this item, but maybe,
Yeah.
I think coming in the near future, we're gonna have that discussion, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, so we determined it, we wanted to go a different direction than what we were going with the last one, the last CAO is my only concern.
Yeah,
You need to,
sure.
that's what you said, you need to back it up.
Yeah, so when do we want to have a conversation about some of those changes that we've touched on over the month of, mid-December? That's obviously needs to come.
Yeah, I plan on, over the next few months, bringing some of those organizational issues to the board. I don't have any specific dates in mind, but the ones you mentioned, personnel, administrative staff, more in order for the administrator to be successful, to help the administrator be successful in getting things done. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be tied to the recruitment.
One thing that when I review this here, in terms of dealing with our last 2 or 3 administrators going back at least to John Kennelson, it's an issue that seems to plague. And you deal with, on the third panel inside, it talks about board relations, and you read what that says, and what we actually experienced when we dealt with the individuals involved for two different things. So obviously, either they didn't read this or we didn't read it, and maintain that as defining our relationship. So I think we need to strengthen that. But one thing that's missing from that, which I think, I've observed that pattern, and it's important that I think we put it in there, is California's had for 100 years now. It started in 1911 with schools and, I don't know, and then in 1913 they actually expanded it to counties and so forth. And that is the nonpartisan tradition. You know, up to that time when you ran for office, whether it was supervisor, sheriff, whatever, it's a partisan thing. If you were following the news, what's going on in like New Jersey with the Bridgegate thing, you know, and you have, you know, the governor in here, and he's wanting these mayors and stuff to endorse him or support him, and they didn't, so they kind of mess with, and it's all based on partisanship, you know, I mean, in terms of underlying that. And local government in California, you know, is not a partisan operation. I mean, not that partisan issues in the background might be there, and there are preferences and so forth, but there's not a Republican way of changing the light bulb versus the Democrat way to change the light bulb. I mean, or run the trains or run the buses or whatever may be the case. And that's the theory. And when you look at the ICMA stuff, when you get over on this side and talk about the International City Managers thing, I mean, you try to eliminate the partisan spins when it comes to taking care of day-to-day business. I mean, the taxpayers are there, it's not to fight the political wars, but to take care of what the business is. So I think we need to put in that narrative a reminder to the people who are applying, as well as the people who are hiring, you know, that the person who's going to fill this job has got to be apolitical, non-political, and because when they start playing politics, and they will if you let them, that's where you start having a number of problems. And I would say that we've experienced that in recent CAOs, more than one. It's not just germane to one person, it's across the board. And I think that we need to make sure and convey that when we do the interviews coming through it. And I think that's where we've come up short, is because that we're thinking that's what the game is, and we're playing by those rules, only to find out that they're not necessarily respecting those rules.
Well, the interviews are gonna cut the wheat from the chaff. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what your interview process has been in the past, but
Dismal.
we really need to be strong about our interviews.
You got it. Lessons learned.
That's gonna tell us what
And I
we
think
got.
not only that, but the vetting process also needs to be strengthened. We have been let down in the past.
Okay, I think we've enough.
We've got direction.
All right. If
So
there-
on this thing, are we gonna do some modification of this?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you have to know, you noted those.
I've made some notes, and if anybody has any suggestions over the next,
You and Cheryl work with you.
right, please forward them.
Come back on this will come back on our 28th agenda.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to H12. This is to do with an amendment to the contract with, for legal services.
Yes, the existing contract that we have with Lever Cassidy is reaching, they're gonna go above the dollar threshold for this fiscal year that was established. And so we're asking for an increase to that contract.
Need,
I make a motion.
And we use these for,
We use these attorneys for a variety of reasons, and Cheryl, maybe you can,
are these personnel related, like dealing with
That's what I
Yes,
thought.
mostly personnel.
personal litigations and stuff? I mean, like the workers' comp claims and.
not workers' comp, but other general liability claims.
I'll second.
okay,
I-
we have, yeah.
I have a question.
So we have a motion and a second, and before we take the vote, yeah, I'd like to open it up to, if anybody from the public has anything to say.
Jean Hodge, I'd like to know what the dollar figures are on how much was allocated and how much you're asking for in an increase, just for my own information.
Okay,
not to exceed.
The current
$25,000.
thing
You
was-
want me to ask some information on that, Richard?
Would you
We-
please?
we-
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, we did look at that the other day when we discussed amending this contract. And an increase to the budget isn't being requested. There's an existing appropriation that will cover the contract request. It's just this vendor will, needs a contract increase. So they won't use a contract that was in the budget for another purpose.
So what are the numbers?
It was 25,000, we're asking for an increase of 10,000 to 35.
not to
Right.
exceed 35,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye, passes unanimous. Move on to H13, information for the board.
I made some notes. The Supervisor Pyle and Supervisor Hammond also made some inquiries over the last week about the designation of drought for the state of California. And apparently which would predominantly affect ag producers as it relates to Farm Service Agency and other programs and some IRS regulations. And apparently what we've learned is that the governor is reluctant to declare a state of disaster due to the drought because he wants to focus on conservation, which is interesting. But I plan next week to bring back a letter in support that the board could consider adopting in support of a drought declaration because of the impacts it will have on the producers in this area.
If I, you know, in the past, we've always focused on the farmers, and I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on the farmers. I think they definitely, and some of the news pieces I've seen on the media in the last few days, I mean, there's some ranching family in like Nebraska is like having to sell their herds or something, and there's, I mean, they talk about the impact on business, but tourism and recreation, you know, also depends upon, you know, kind of a healthy environment to be in. So in addition to what we see with the livestock and the grain producers and the other farming operations, I mean, I think about, look at Eagle Lake, I mean, in terms of, and it's not just Eagle Lake, I mean, Eagle Lake looks just like Lake Mead. When we were there in September, it was just unbelievable. And you took a picture of the elevation, the hydrographic chart, and if you take that and superimposed it with that one on the back of the board chambers, it'd look like the same kind of heartbeat. So I mean, this is happening all over the western United States. But the folks who have tried to make a living, particularly those who, when it comes to the fisheries, you know, providing guide service, you know, in terms of providing hospitality services and so forth, some of them, most of them have probably gone out of business. But in talk about, you know, disaster assistance, I mean, I think we have business folks like that in terms of providing services, trying to attract people to come here. How can you promote coming to, you know, beautiful Lassen County and enjoy Eagle Lake? And Eagle Lake's like a puddle because of the drought. And so I think that the disaster assistance, if we're going to get into that, I think we need to be looking at that, needs to be broader based than just looking at the agriculture element, which absolutely has to be a part of it. But I think we need to talk about expanding it so that when you deal with the governor office and stuff, let's include that element, because we never had, I mean, the businesses up and down Main Street that depend upon the tourism coming through here, like heading to the lake, they're being affected. I mean, I'm sure the business down your way in coming up through Milford from Reno, I mean, you're not having the kind of traffic because the people who was there. I was, you know, November, unfortunately had to spend some time in an endodontist chair over in Reno, Dr. Gray's office, and the gal that was assisting Dr. Gray, I didn't know, but she lives up in like Eagle Lake, and so she was talking about what it meant for them, and she has a place in Reno, but they like to spend their time up Eagle Lake, but there's no lake to enjoy for their perspective. So they're not making the trips over here like they were, which means all the business they would bring with them, and if they brought their friends with them, are being lost. So I think that needs to be quantified and measured and be part of whatever disaster assistance that might come forth down the road.
Duly noted, and I'll bring the draft back. The only other thing I was gonna mention to the board, I'll be attending the Fort Sage School District meeting on Wednesday night with Supervisor Hammond.
Thank you. Okay. Before we take up the last item on the agenda, I just want to say thanks for bearing with me, and I want to let it be known that I haven't made staff incur any overtime. We're going to get to the agenda, and the members of the public will be home in time for dinner,
So we haven't met for 3 weeks, Mr. Chairman. I'd have to say you conducted a very good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So we'll move on to the last item, being I-1, the subject of the deer hunt with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Well, instead of receiving a file, I'd like to request that we do something with this piece. And this isn't the first year. We haven't seen one of these in a few years. But I'd like to see us have on our January 28th meeting, which is the last meeting of the month, a public hearing to entertain any public input concerning this, because this is like a legal thing that Fish and Game has to send out if they propose to have either sex type of a hunt or a specific doe hunt before. It's a default thing. They have to notify us, and we have this, each board of supervisors in each of the 58 counties have the opportunity to veto the either sex or a doe type hunt. This is just either sex they're proposing here. It has to do with shooting the female deer. I can guarantee it's always been an emotional issue in Lassen County. And so I would suggest that we just don't let it, pass by without any notice. We schedule a formal hearing. If nobody shows up, fine, it's not a big deal. If the room is full of people and you hear about it, you can decide whether you want to exercise the veto right or not. The Fish and Game Commission is meeting Thursday night. I would say we give them this letter, make them aware of it. They may want to come and give us some testimony. But I think we need to go through that process to determine that, and if we don't, I guarantee it probably will reflect bad otherwise. The other thing along that lines, if you recall, it was about a year ago when we had the Fish and Game and the Fish and Wildlife folks here telling us about OR 7. And they were, the two gals, it was pretty impressive listening to the discussion. So when they were all done, I said, well, I appreciate learning all about this wolf wandering around the county, but I said my constituents, particularly here in town, but I'm sure it's true throughout the county, with the mountain lion population and the pressure, a lot of the deer aren't living out there, and when it comes to a doe hunt, I think probably half of my constituents would be in favor of having one here in town because of the amount of deer that live in town. But we were promised by those ladies that this Brian Adler, who's one of the local Fish and Game guy here, was supposed to come in and talk to us about the deer in town. And on Susan's tickle list, right here, this one has made it all the way to the top. It's the oldest one on the tickle list. So in addition to having this discussion on the 28th, it would be nice if we can get this guy to come in and let's talk about the deer we have living here in town as a side to that. But this public hearing is very important, and I'd like to see us have that scheduled. And the Fish and Game Commission, in addition to the other stuff you got to deal with, Don, if you could take this and include that as part of the feedback we need. Now, everybody come in and say, hey, this is the best thing we can do, and let's get it done and let's support it. I have no problem. If they come in and say, no, we shouldn't be doing this, we need to be able to take an action to let them know, because as of January 31st, if we don't, it's an automatic thing. They'll go and do it regardless of what anybody has to say.
There's two things on that. When you fly this as a public meeting, emphasize the fact this is an apprentice hunt.
Yes.
This is not a general hunt. Apprentice hunts are like junior hunts. And right now, I'm preparing a letter to go to the Fish and Game and say you gotta do more to get junior hunts going because we're losing hunters because the kids can't hunt. The other part is, and this is just anal, which I can get, Brian Ayler's name is spelled E-H-L-E-R.
Maybe that's why he hasn't responded, because they've got his name spelled wrong on there. Good job.
Could you tell us what an apprentice hunt is?
It's a
It's like a junior hunt. It's someone who's
16
passed
below.
their,
But the
16 or under, and they've
Okay.
passed their hunter education course,
Yeah.
and they hunt with an adult.
The issue before us isn't whether it's a junior hunt. The issue is the fact that either sex or female deer would be subject to the hunt, and that's the, whether it's junior or senior or whoever, but I think it's one that we need to have properly addressed, so I would like to see that done.
There is a great emotional difference between a general hunt and an apprentice hunt in the reaction of the public.
Well, let's get them all in here and support it, if you can have that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Aldall.
Yeah, Don, while you're up there, I'd like to ask you a question. I don't know off the top of my head, but where is zone X7A for the deer zone? Do you know off the top of your
It's
head?
in Sierra Valley, Calpine, this little town of Calpine sits right smack in the middle of it. And it spreads out across Sierra Valley and up into the forest a little ways. It's got a lot of public land access.
Okay.
It's in Lassen County.
Partially
A
in
little small
Lassen,
part,
partially in Sierra.
Mostly in Sierra and part,
Yeah.
yeah, part in
I thought it was
Plumas
all
and part in
Sierra,
ours,
actually.
yeah.
And the other thing I'd like to bring up is I appreciate the junior hunts, you know, I mean, we got, they do the antelope up there in, at the Beaver Wildlife Refuge. I guess this is gonna be zone wide for the deer hunt. But maybe another thing that, and I'll throw this out to you guys, maybe think about and chew on, is having apprentice trapping zones, like on the wildlife refuges, which, because that's where all of our predators come from. They're the ones that eat the sage grouse and the ducks and the geese and et cetera,
Yeah.
but maybe open it up for the juniors, or a junior trapping area.
That could be a suggestion, yeah.
It's just something to think about.
We can debate the impact of predators on sage-grouse.
Okay, if there's nothing further on that matter, to bring our business to a close, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
We're going into closed session again.